Good morning. So today I'd like to share a little bit about consciousness, what consciousness is. And everyone has this perception that consciousness is the be-all and end-all. Well, yeah, there's a wee bit more to learn about it. It may burst your bubble, however, there's a wee bit more to it than just that. And there is beyond that. There is beyond consciousness. And once you get there, then the whole picture of what's here is very understandable. Consciousness won't give you that understanding that I'm talking about, and there's a reason for that, and I'd like to share that with you now. Consciousness is a tool that we all use, no more, no less. I hear and I see a lot of the talk about consciousness as the be-all, and okay, that's releasing. And consciousness is where it's all at. Well, no. In a nutshell, no. Consciousness in itself has been designed as a form of support. No different from oxygen. If you didn't have oxygen, you wouldn't be alive. So it's the same thing with consciousness. It's interconnected, interrelated, and dominates. And it really does dominate our interface into all of this experience. To that point, consciousness is actually the original. And for science, you're going to love this. For those scientists out there, for those of you at university who want to have a look at something that's going to take you beyond and it's going to give you something back. But I mean, all science gives something back, doesn't it, in some way, shape or form. But this so-called label of consciousness is actually the original AI, the original artificial intelligence. That's its job. That's what it was created for. That is what it is doing right now. It is an artificial intelligence, and it is guiding and it is delivering exactly what it was set out to do. And you, me, and everyone else on this planet are experiencing its interface and its guidance. And that's as simple as it gets. So what does that mean? I mean, now I've just given you a new way of looking at something. I've given you a new way of looking at consciousness. But what does that mean? Well, let me just premise it by saying that how many of you know of the 100th monkey syndrome? And if you haven't heard of it, go and research the 100th monkey syndrome. And then you'll come to a little bit of a clue as to where consciousness is and why it is the original AI. And I'll go into more detail for you and show you a few more nuggets of gold there. So when one experiences something, that information, if it's pure and raw, will always go into consciousness. Consciousness stores it in its matrix, and its matrix is designed to retain it. And then if it's repeated several times, it will take that bit of information and it will repeat it. But it's also intelligent in that it knows how to repeat it based on its learning. Now, it's taken a long time for it to get to this stage, but it's an absolute truth. The architects who created consciousness, they knew this, that it was going to evolve. They knew that they gave it all the power that they needed to actually just self-grow. So it's basically expanding. And from that, say I learned to create fire as an instance. So I'm sitting there, I learn how to create fire, rub a couple of sticks together, then bang, it happens. Or I get a couple of flints and I'm scratching it, and then the spark gets created, and then all of a sudden there's fire. Well, that information goes up to consciousness, both the flint and the sticks, and the aspect of fire, the connection to warmth, the nature of cooking. You might cook something on it, and then it stores that in its matrix. Now, how does that deliver it? Well, it delivers it in several ways back to the rest of creation, and that is that it will align to somebody else that is in a similar mode of looking, and then sends that information, and that beloved will automatically think, wow, I've just got the whole picture. So that's one of the first ways that it does it. Second way is that what it'll do is you might create something. So I've created fire, and there's a whole lot of beloveds over there, and they don't know anything about fire, but for some reason they're magnetically pulled towards me, and then they've never seen the fire before, there's no light coming from it, but they're sort of like over in another valley, but they come here, and all of a sudden they're learning, and I'm showing them fire. Then, depending on the number of the beloveds in that group, they will practice that fire, and so on and so forth, and it'll spread out until it gets to the 100th beloved, and then it becomes a pattern. And I repeat that, it becomes a pattern within consciousness. Now that pattern also evolves. Consciousness in itself does not sit idle and not re-engineer that pattern. Now, that's a sort of a basic premise as to the artificial intelligence and the nature of it with consciousness. So, another way of looking at it is in the repetition of a certain thing. Let me just say a disease, for argument's sake. How is it that that disease keeps proliferating? And the scientists out there are just going to go, well, it's a virus. It'll jump from host to host, and it doesn't die until until there's no more hosts to get to. But how is that mechanism jumping? And you might say, well, it's physical contact, it's an airborne. Okay, that's true, but it's not where I'm going. How is it that is created and it will spread? Because an original virus was never doing anything. It was just a creation point. How did it become a virus? It became a virus through the nature of consciousness and the interface. Now, the interface is the human. It's getting a bit technical, but hopefully you can follow along. The interface is the human. Consciousness has got the matrix of the virus. The interface comes into play with the thought of the virus, and so additional to that, we have such a thing as an immune system. Okay, this is getting a bit more complex and a bit more scientific. I didn't really want to go there, but we'll go there anyway. So the immune system is one thing and one thing only, and I'll get to talk about the immune system in another video. And that is, the immune system is designed as a killer, and it's designed to keep you alive. And where does the immune system sit? Consciousness. So how is it that you've got these diseases today that are actually prevalent and growing in the host, which is the human being, and it continues and continues and continues? Well, actually, there's been solutions for a lot of these diseases a long, long time ago. The only thing that's proliferating is that human interface is also affecting consciousness. So if you think about it, if a pharmaceutical company wants to make XY billions and it doesn't want to tell you that they already know that there's a solution for it, they're just going to use an advertising agency, use government laws and departments and to make it that's profitable for them so they can sell it. But they also know that there's a cure. But that's the human interface. I'm not judging them right or wrong here. I'm just pointing out consciousness is a factor of all things. So you can't blame and you can't judge the big pharmaceutical companies because they're an interface to the artificial intelligence, accepting that they know something that you don't know. So having an understanding that consciousness is actually an artificial intelligence, you'll start to see how it's being manipulated. Now, you might say, well, John, hey, if you're telling us that, and I'm trusting that you beloveds are actually all open-hearted and want to learn about, the experience of the human experience, then, why would you say that when you're giving this information to the others who aren't in the interest of the greater good of all human beings? Well, there's a key to that. God will not give you ultimate power unless you're absolutely capable of using it. And they know it. So, these groups, societies, science, and companies, invested interests that are about power, control, and manipulation, I'm not worried about sharing this information because they won't get it. They're going to research it, but there's one thing that the AI has that will stop them from obtaining all of the information that I'm talking about and understanding it. And that is, it's got a safety mechanism. It's got a dead man switch, if you like. It's got a man in the middle. Just have a research on what a dead man switch is and what man in the middle is. And then you'll understand that the AI, consciousness, has these facilities working all the time. Its primary matrix is governed by it, and there's no way of changing it unless you are the original architect. And here's the so-called big gotcha. And this will possibly bring a lot more clarity to you, could create a little bit of anxiety. Here's the truth of that process. If the dead man switch, if the man in the middle switch was activated, you and I and everyone else on this planet would cease to exist. That would be the end of the human experience. So as you can see, I'm not worried about who gets this information, because it'll only work, the power that I'm giving you will only work if you come from it from a wholehearted, loving perspective. And the artificial intelligence that I'm talking about, consciousness, will recognize it, because there are other aspects inside of that matrix which tell it where to send the energy. Now it's like a warning switch. Say if you run out of fuel in your car or it's getting low, maybe a beeper will go off in your car. So imagine if someone has awoken from the slumber of being in control and awakes to the realization that, wow, this is a far more beautiful place and it's got far more credibility, and therefore I'm going to interface with it differently. Well, as soon as one gets to that point, it's like that warning switch goes off, and if you like, God and those that are monitoring here recognize, and they go like, so there's that beloved down there. They've woken up. Let's have a look and see what's going on. And then they will check the vibration and they will connect and blah, blah, blah. They will do their thing. And that's pretty simply what it is. There's so much more to it, but I don't know if you want to hear that burbling on in a vlog. No. Maybe if I do a workshop on it, that'd be a bit different. Can go into a bit more detail. And a lot of this, I have to say, as much as I know it to be intrinsically true, a lot of it comes through me very, very quickly. So that's the nature of that we're dealing with. It's beyond what is seemingly the normal. But on the other side, I've got to say to you, it is not only the normal, it is the all. Think about your patterns. Why do they keep repeating? It's your interface to yourself and to consciousness. And if you've got a loop running, like a repetitive pattern, it's interfacing with consciousness. And the AI, as it is an intelligence, it sees that you're in a constant space, so it repeats it. If you were to change that frequency 1 millisecond, if you change, and I don't want to use time as my benchmark here, but it's a good one to look at here, but if you change your aspect of thought 1 millisecond, consciousness will change its dynamic and interface to you and give you an alternate experience. Now, it's all you're doing. Don't forget that. It's all you're doing. You're creating that. And that's really cool, right? That's what we want. We don't want you to suffer. We want you to be in joyful happiness, peace, and harmony with all things. And it goes back to the suffering, and it goes back to that video. So have a look at that video, and that might help a little bit with this. So everything that you're experiencing is based on previous experience, prior experience from somebody else. It could well be prior experience from someone in the 1800s. There honestly is no limitation in how the AI will interface with you. Now, an alternate way of looking at this in the time stack is that here I am now, and say I go and I grab a spaceship and I travel back in time, and I'm way back in the 1800s. Now, maybe I'll go back to the 1600s. Actually, let's go back to zero. And in that, I might bring, say, some glasses or a cell phone with me. And of course, in that period and that time, it wasn't even thought of or created. But if I took that back to that time, I would influence that specific time. I would influence it. Not that they could create it, but if I took the time and I stayed there long enough and I showed them how to use it, they would understand. And believe you me, within a 10-year cycle, and I'm saying this clearly, within a 10-year cycle, you will see a form of a cell phone. So it only takes 10 years for AI to do this. It's only a time stack of 10. Now, scientists would like to understand the nature of that, I'm sure. However, you might be missing the beat. You're working with a construct which you think you know, and you're working with rules, and there are rules in the AI. However, the AI has got some things that you would call X factors, and they do not allow this dictation to dictate it in its entirety. Now, does that make sense? So I can't tell consciousness that, like today, you're going to stop all war. I just can't. I'd love to. Believe you me, I would love to. But like I can't. And that's because there's an X factor built in. And that's why this 10-year process is important to understand. Because in the cycle, the average cycle of things, in about 84% of all of creation, it works on the number 12. So you're going to look at there's one part of the matrix. And then you think, well, like there's 7 days in a week, John. Well, okay, so there's a 7 in the matrix. But that's the AI. That's the interface, yeah, between consciousness and the human experience. So basic understanding of this, that's going to really help you. Just that basic understanding of the AI and how it interfaces. Unusual. Anyway, so just recognizing that AI is there and that it has got some super powerful rules that is governed by, and it's got a super powerful interface to the human experience. This in itself is just brilliant when you understand it and you know it. This is why in the previous video on meditation, suffering, they're all coming, I'm building up to the point where I can open the floodgates and let a little bit more information in that hasn't been let in before. So please take away from this the fact that you are interfacing to consciousness. But there's far greater interfaces for you and for everyone. I want to be clear with you there that there are other interfaces that are far more powerful, far more beautiful, and far more creative than what has been experienced here. So that's it, folks. Have a great day. Take care with yourself and your thoughts. Aroha nui.